House will come back to order. House will come to order. All members will report back to the floor of the House. Mr. Clerk, would you ring the bell? Clerk will read the caption to a group of privileged resolutions.
Recognizing and commending Wendell Willard. Recognizing and commending Dr. Craig Wentworth on his outstanding lifetime service to higher education and congratulating him upon the grand occasion of his retirement. Honoring communities and schools of Rome-Floyd County on the grand occasion of his 25th anniversary. Recognizing and commending Pat Pullar. And for other purposes, that completes the reading of the privileged resolutions.
We're going back to the rules calendar that was carried forward from this morning before lunch. I'm sorry. Is there any objection to adopting the privileged resolutions? The chair hears none, and the resolutions are adopted. We had two bills that were carried over from the calendar earlier today. We're going to take those up first, and then we should have the supplemental rules calendar to take up. Clerk will read the caption to Senate Bill 52.
Senate Bill 52 by Senator Ligon of the 3rd and Stone of the 23rd, being entitled an act to amend the official code of Georgia annotated so as to revise, modernize, correct errors or omissions in, and react the statutory portion of said code as amended in furtherance of the work of the Code Revision Commission. This bill having referred to the Committee on Code Revision, that committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Chair recognizes Chairman Tim Barr to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the title very eloquently puts this is the Code Revision Bill brought to us every year by the Code Revision Commission. It makes sure that our commas are in the right place as we want our code to be compliant. It's incredibly simple, but it does require a couple of pages to do so. If there are any questions, I'll stand for those, Mr. Speaker. Otherwise, I'd ask for your favorable consideration.
You have no questions.
Thank you, sir.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered on Senate Bill 52? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of Senate Bill 52 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the passage of Senate Bill 52. The ayes are 148, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. And I want y'all to look and see that before day 28, We have passed a Senate bill. Let there be peace in our time. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 132.
House Bill 132 by Representative Williamson of the 115th, be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 7 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated, relating the imposition rate and computation and exemptions from state income taxes. This bill having been referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, that committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Chair recognizes Representative Williamson to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the House. I bring before you today House Bill 132. This bill allows Georgia's film tax credit and the post-production credits to be transferred within a parent company's subsidiaries. Presently, the only alternative for earned but unused credits is to sell them into the secondary market at a substantial discount, and sometimes to out-of-state purchasers who happen to have a Georgia income tax liability. By allowing the parent company to use these excess credits against payroll taxes, we're making sure that the credits are actually supporting Georgia jobs. Under the current structure, it's kind of like telling a spouse who has a tax loss credit that they can't use it for the benefit of the other spouse even though they file a joint return. Be happy to answer any questions. Now, Mr. Speaker, I yield the well. I ask for your favor.
You have a question if you care to yield.
I'll be happy to, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilkerson to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Just to clarify, so you would now be allowed to use the credit your parent corporation against, you said, payroll taxes?
That's correct. It has to be a wholly owned subsidiary, and I want to remind you that the only alternative right now is if you have an unused income tax credit in the subsidiary, they do have the option of monetizing that credit by selling it into the secondary market. This would allow them not to have to do that they could just transfer and get, because when you, as you're well aware, when you sell it to the secondary market, the best you can get maybe is 85, 88 cents on the dollar. Then the broker gets a fee, and the ultimate user of that tax credit applies it against his or her income tax liability to the state of Georgia. So I did mean to and thank you for the question, because it allows me to footnote this is no fiscal impact at all to the state of Georgia.
Okay, I guess one additional question to the gentleman further yield.
Yes, I do.
So just to clarify, in most situations, I guess, can you use your payroll taxes as an individual? You can't, or as a corporation, can you use your payroll tax to reduce your income tax liability? Is that how you typically do it?
So help me understand the question again.
I guess are we mixing two? Because currently you can only use that credit against income taxes.
No, that's not correct. Currently in the film tax code, the subsidiary that earns the credit has 3 paths to utilize that credit: against Georgia corporate income tax liability that it might owe, against withholding taxes, or then they can sell, or if they still have unused credits, they can monetize it by selling that credit to a third party.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But you.
No further questions.
Thank you. I ask for your favorable consideration of House Bill 132, and I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Abel Mabel Thomas to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of the distinguished body. I rise in support of House Bill 132. But I also thought it was important to add to this discussion is that many of us know with the passage of the film tax credit in 2008, the film and television industry experienced rapid growth in Georgia. In the fiscal year, maybe about $9 billion impact to the state. And in 2016, the legislative session, House Resolution 577 was adopted, creating a House Study Committee on minority participation in the film and television industry. And some of the recommendations that would sort of help was, we talked about expanding the Georgia Film Academy curricula to include above the pipeline development for writers, producers, and directors that include incentives to ensure minority participation in the program, model and adapt existing legislation for increased minority participation in Georgia film and television industry. One example in Illinois is the Film Production Service Tax Credit Act of 2018, which said it shall be the policy of that state to promote and encourage the training and hiring of Illinois residents who represent the diversity of the Illinois population through the creation and implementation of training, education, and recruitment programs organized in cooperation with Illinois labor organization, the motion picture industry, and the Illinois College would be similar to the Georgia Film Academy. Also, to implement an add-on tax incentive for the inclusion of Georgia resident minorities on film and television projects, and to implement a tax credit for Georgia-based resident filmmakers who spend between $100,000 and $499,000, equivalent to the sales tax that they pay on purchases they make for their project. Presently is $500,000 and above. And the other recommendation we had was to implement a tax credit incentive for Georgia production studios to include minority companies in their vendors list. These are some of the recommendations that we've made as relates to the diversity of the film and television production industry that we believe will add more jobs for Georgians. And so as we continue to support the tax credit and House Bill 132, let us not forget the possibility of expanding the workforce to include more minorities and to make sure that we provide a place for all Georgians to benefit in the financial impact of this industry in the state of Georgia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield the will.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Holland rise?
Mr. Speaker, I request to be excused from the vote pursuant to Rule 133.
The lady has that right, and the journal will so reflect. What purpose does Representative Carson rise?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Rule 133, I ask to be excused from this vote.
Gentleman has that right, and the journal will so reflect. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 132, the ayes are 156, the nays are 4. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. We are going on now to the supplemental rules calendar. Supplemental rules calendar. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 201.
House Bill 201 by Representative Hogan of the 179th, Petrie the 166th, and others, to be entitled an act to amend Title 52 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to waters of the state, ports, and watercraft, to authorize the Board of Natural Resources to promulgate rules and regulations regarding anchoring certain vessels. This bill has been referred to the Committee on Natural Resources and Environment. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Representative, before I recognize you to present the bill, I need to find out something. This bill is not a clandestine, sneaky attempt to create a new city on the coast, is it? I mean, buried in this bill, there's nothing about cityhood, is there? I've had some members that, they get nervous when they see you coming up here with a bill, so Chair recognizes Representative Hogan to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. The bill I have before you today is House Bill 201, which is a very simple bill. It requires liveaboard folks on vessels in the state's estuaries to do pump outs. Now, pump outs is requiring them to take the raw sewage off of their liveaboards and pump that out of holding tanks that are aboard their vessels. The other thing that it does, and monitored by DNR, the other thing that it does is allows DNR to establish mooring areas for vessels that are coming up and down the coast and allowing them to moor or anchor in the mooring areas. And basically that's what the bill does. Mr. Speaker,
you have some questions.
I hope they're good questions. Otherwise, I really don't want to hear them, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, I wish life were that easy, Representative. Chair, who defines good, Representative?
I do.
Okay. Can't argue with that. Chair recognizes the Majority Caucus Whip, Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the elderly gentleman in the well yield.
It took everything I could do, maybe a little bit of money to get you moved from over here to over here.
Will my friend yield?
I yield.
Just a moment ago, you said you had your own definition of good. Is that correct?
My own definition of good?
Of what's a good question?
Yes, sir.
And will you further yield?
Yes.
Isn't it true that each member of this body may have their own definition of what may be a good bill, and we may show you our definition in just a moment?
I'm sure everybody has their own opinion. Everybody has an opinion, and I know you do.
Will my friend yield for just a couple more questions?
Yes, I yield.
Isn't it true that the basis of this bill, the kind of underlying issue, deals with how one handles human excrement on a boat? Is that correct? And I'm saying it in a very, polite way of saying that.
Have you been on a liveaboard vessel?
You never invited me on yours, but.
Well, yes, sir. You're right.
One more question, will you yield?
Yes, I yield.
What does it say about your legislative career that your first bill deals with human excrement?
Well, I've been around you a lot.
Congratulations. I think at this point I'll yield, Mr. Speaker.
A highlight reel moment from this session there.
If there are no more questions, I yield the well.
You have more questions.
Yes, sir, I will hear.
One
more.
One more, okay. Well, this is a member that has never asked anything other than a good question. Chair recognizes Representative Al Williams to your left for a question.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, sir, I yield.
Is it not true that my distinguished colleague from the coast, First, that was a wonderful response to the distinguished whip. Let me compliment you.
Yes, sir.
But is it not true that this bill's only intent is to make sure that our crabs and shrimp grow naturally and not unnaturally from fertilizer that we don't want them to have?
Yes, sir, you're right. From fertilizer from the vessels, as the majority whip had indicated.
Exactly. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 201 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 201, the ayes are 162, the nays are 1. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 276.
House Bill 276 by Representative Harrell of the 106th, Kelly of the 16th, Carson of the 46th, Knight of the 130th, Williamson of the 115th. Be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to state sales and use taxes so as to modify the definition of dealer. This bill having been referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Harrell, to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 276 seeks to provide a definition of a marketplace facilitator. This is an entity that provides an online marketplace for people to sell and purchase items. And what the purpose of this legislation is to provide that new definition and to have the marketplace facilitator be the point of collection and remittance for sales taxes that are already due. This bill does not add any additional sales taxes, tax any items that are not already currently taxable under our code. On page 1 of the bill, you see those definitions of a marketplace facilitator. Moving over to page 2, you see the definitions of marketplace seller. Moving on to section 2 on page 2, you see the implementation of the existing sales tax, both state and local, and that it makes that facilitator the responsible party for collecting and remitting those taxes. If you go down to line 57, you will see that no retail sale that is not taxable to the purchaser today shall be taxable under this bill. Again, it provides no expansion of current taxes or taxes that are not already due. And at the very top of page 3, beginning on line 62, you'll see that the marketplace seller that happens to be doing business on one of these platforms is relieved of any liability for that collection and remittance. So this is a good thing for small businesses that are doing business on one of these large platforms. The Georgia Retailers Association supports this measure as another measure that levels the playing field for our brick and mortar retailers versus those doing business out of state and online. The Georgia Municipal Association and the Association of County Commissioners are also in support of this particular piece of legislation, as is the Georgia food industry. I'm aware of no opposition to House Bill 276. I would be glad to answer questions on this measure.
You have no questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 276 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of House Bill 276. The ayes are 158, the nays are 6. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 344.
House Bill 344 by Representative Gamble of the 15th, Hatchett of the 150th, Silcox of the 52nd, Dollar of the 45th, Dreyer of the 59th, and others, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated, relating to sales and use taxes, so as to provide that the mission to advance arts in this state should not be required to be an organization's primary mission. This bill having referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Gamble to present the bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I want to thank, first of all, my seatmate and colleague, Representative Spencer Fry, for working with me on this bill. This was originally his legislation, but basically the legislation that you have before you, House Bill 344, helps some of our nonprofit low-cost housing providers from paying local ad valorem property tax on their single-family lots until they build the home and sell it to their pre-approved homeowner, where it goes back on the tax rolls at a much higher value. There is a clawback provision in this legislation that says if the home isn't built and the lot sold, then all taxes are due at that time. And the organizations that represent our local governments all support this legislation.
Are you yielding for questions?
Yes, sir. I yield for questions.
Chair recognizes Chairman Hawkins to your right for a question.
Does the representative yield?
Yes, sir, I do.
I'm reading the yellow sheet. It doesn't say anything about what you're talking about. We're talking about arts and performances.
Yes, sir. That was the original legislation, and this particular legislation, 344, it was previously House Bill 313 that Representative Fry had worked on, dealing with Habitat for Humanity specifically.
I realize that. Is this your first bill?
Yes, sir, it is.
I hope you get some more questions.
Thank you.
Do you further yield?
I will, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the chairman of the Insurance Committee, Chairman Smith, to your left for a question.
Thank you, sir. Do you yield?
Yes, sir, I do.
Once upon a time, didn't your wife used to be a House member?
She was a representative in this House, yes, sir.
And I think at the time she represented a part of Columbus. Is that not correct?
That is true.
It would probably benefit you if you followed her lead. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. That is also true.
Do you continue to yield?
I will yield for one more question.
Chair recognizes the chair of the Higher Education Committee, Chairman Martin, to your right for a question.
Gentleman yield.
Yes, sir, I do.
Earlier in your statement, presentation of the bill, you mentioned that all the local governments were in favor of this. Is that true?
Yeah, the organizations that support our local governments, or represent our local governments.
Well, there are, I believe, I'm correct saying there are 548 cities that GMA represents. Could you name those for the House this afternoon?
Only if we have enough time for that.
Mr. Speaker, you'd yield to the gentleman if he can name them all, wouldn't you?
Can we put that on the board and let the House decide?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair's going to ask you to take one more question.
Okay.
Chair recognizes your seatmate, Representative Fry, to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Thank you so much for carrying this bill. Thank you for helping us out, and thank you for helping us provide low-cost housing to the citizens of the state. Appreciate you.
Thank you. If there's no additional questions, I yield the will, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 344 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of House Bill 344. The ayes are 164, the nays are 1. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 182.
House Bill 182 by Representative Harrell of the 106th, Williamson of the 115th, Stevenson of the 164th, Knight of the 130th, to be titled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 8 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating state sales and use tax so as to lower the threshold amount for certain dealers. This bill having been referred to the Committee on Ways and Means, that committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Chair recognizes Chairman Harrell to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, House Bill 182 does two simple things. On line 12, it drops the threshold for being a dealer subject to sales tax in Georgia from $250,000 to $100,000. This is a result of a U.S. Supreme Court case known as the Wayfair case that was settled last year after passage of House Bill 61. You'll recall we passed that bill last year. It is in effect today, and this simply drops that threshold to $100,000, consistent with that U.S. court decision. In Section 2, we repeal a requirement that was included in House Bill 61 last year. That would have required an online retailer that did not meet that $250,000 threshold to send the buyer in Georgia a notice that told them they may have taxes due the state of Georgia. So it completely repeals that requirement for an online retailer to send you as the purchaser a notice that you may owe the state taxes. Again, as with the last bill, doesn't expand to tax any new items that are not currently taxable. Mr. Speaker, I will yield for questions on House Bill 182.
You have no questions.
Thank you.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 182 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 182, the ayes are 158, the nays are 3. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 224.
House Bill 224 by Representative Williamson of the 115th, Kelly of the 16th, Powell of the 171st, Harrell of the 106th, Meeks of the 178th, and others. Be titled an act to amend Article 2 of Chapter 7, Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated, relating to the imposition, rate, computation, and exemptions from state income tax. This bill having referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Williamson to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As everybody knows, Georgia's been ranked the #1 place in which to do business for 6 years in a row. A lot of that's principally due to the fantastic work that's done by the Georgia Department of Economic Development. And today I hold before you their toolkit for the tax incentives, and it is tax incentives that bring these large businesses to Georgia. And we're going to make, House Bill 224 makes 3 tweaks to this tax incentive structure. Again, everyone's well aware of the work that's been done by the House Rural Study Committee over the last year or so, and every one of these recommendations come out of the work that the House Rural Study Committee did. So House Bill 224 is going to make 3 changes to 3 different programs currently used by the state of Georgia to recruit businesses. It's all going to have a focus on rural Georgia. So the first change is going to be to the job tax credit in Section 1.1 of the bill. And the bill's going to do 2 things here. It's going to add an additional $500 per job credit and lower the wage requirements for jobs created in Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties that also qualify for One Georgia funding. And when we're talking about qualifying for One Georgia funding, that is counties with a population less than 50,000 and 10% or more of the population living in poverty. That's addressed on lines 229 through 235. The target wage is reduced in these 40 least developed counties, which also qualify under this metric, to 70% of average wage earned in the county, with the lowest average wage earned in Georgia. Theory there being that a job in South Georgia is a job, and every job counts when you talk about these rural counties. The changes in the quality jobs tax credit program, the same metric applies for the rural Georgia definition. The job creation threshold is reduced for Tier 2 counties, which qualify for One Georgia funding, to 10 new quality jobs within 1 year. The job creation threshold for all other counties remains at 50 new quality jobs. So again, the focus is on rural Georgia. The third tool in the toolbox is going to be a slight change to the investment tax credit program. The current minimum investment has not been increased since 1995, and we're proposing to take that, and this bill takes it from $50,000 to $100,000. No one's objected to that. That's across all tiers. but for changes in Tier 1 and Tier 2 rural counties, which are again defined under the code, under the One Georgia funding population restrictions that I told you about, that after January the 1st, 2020, investment tax credits may be used against payroll withholding taxes after they've been used against the taxpayer's corporate tax liability. What you have here a lot of times is very capital intensive companies in South Georgia, and you think anything to do with the timber products business, with timbers, their raw materials coming in, it could be trusses manufactured, it could be advanced materials this shipped out of state, but Georgia manufacturers do not pay corporate income tax on the earnings out of state. So what you've had is these capital intensive businesses that have qualified for income tax credits in Georgia, but because they don't have a very high Georgia income tax liability, they're earning the credits, but there's no way for them to monetize them. Unlike some of these other credits we've talked about in my previous bill before that, they don't have the ability to sell those credits and monetize them in any way, shape, or form. So we're going to open up a window of opportunity for these companies moving forward to monetize the credits, but they have to go back and use any previously earned credits. They're going to have to maintain jobs of at least jobs that have at least 100 employees and make a minimum investment of $5 million. Moving forward, they will be limited to only $1 million per company per year with an aggregate cap across the entire program of $20 million. That's sort of the highlights of what the bill does. It's just affecting these three tools the Georgia Department of Economic Development uses with a focus on rural Georgia. Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
You do have a question if you care to yield.
Yes, sir. I'll be happy to yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Perkle to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Is it not true that the provision within this bill are a direct recommendation from the House Rural Development Council, especially the jobs tax credit and the quality jobs tax credit?
That is correct.
Will the gentleman further yield for
yes,
one
I'll
more?
Be happy to.
Is it not true that I've talked with a good many number of economic development officials, and they are as excited about the potential for this bill as they have been in one in a long time?
I believe the gentleman knows that of what she speaks. If there are no further questions, Mr. Speaker, I yield the well and ask you.
No further questions.
Favorable consideration of House Bill 224.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 224 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of House Bill 224. The ayes are 160, the nays are 2. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Clerk will read the caption to House Bill 266.
House Bill 266 by Representative Wiedauer, the 119th, Sutzler, the 35th, Gaines, the 117th, Cooper, the 43rd, Silcox, the 52nd, and others, to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 48.7 27, the official code of Georgia annotated relating the computation of taxable net income. This bill having been referred to the Committee on Ways and Means. That committee recommends that this bill do pass.
You up for this? Chair recognizes Representative Wiedauer to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Esteemed colleagues, I come before you to present House Bill 266. This is a simple bill that increases the deduction amount for 529 college savings accounts. We currently are at $2,000 for a single filer and $4,000 for married. This bill would double that to $4,000 and $8,000. It is a simple bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield for any questions.
You have some questions. Do you care to yield?
I do.
Chair recognizes Representative Kennard to your left for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Isn't it true that Representative Gamble represented the 7th Republican freshman to get a bill passed on this House in this session, and won't you be the 8th?
I believe the gentleman knows what he speaks.
Do you further yield?
I do.
Isn't it true that there have been no Democratic freshmen afforded that same opportunity?
I am not aware.
One more question.
Sure.
Isn't it true that there's not a tinge of bitterness in my voice about this?
I do not hear one at all.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Do you further yield?
I do.
Well, I have a question, but as so often happens from time to time, a ghost will sit in someone's seat and vote them or put the question light on. So, Chair recognizes Representative Mary Frances Williams to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
So my question is, if we are doubling this deduction, do we have an estimate on what the cost will be to our state revenues?
There was a fiscal note provided, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what did that fiscal note say? I'm sorry, I haven't seen it. If the gentleman further yields.
I do. Is there a particular year you're looking for? On the low end, approximately $1.9 million a year. On the high end, approximately $3 million.
So that's an increase of 1.9 to 3 million for this.
That would be a revenue loss, yes.
All right, thank you.
Do you further yield?
I do.
Chair recognizes Chairman Martin to your right for a question.
Gentleman yield.
I do.
Isn't it true you serve on the Higher Ed Committee?
Yes, sir, I do.
Isn't it true the other day, to the gentleman's question over there, that you were instrumental in helping a Democratic bill get out of that committee that'll be very good for our homeless and foster kids when and if that comes to the floor? Isn't that true?
It is true.
Isn't it further, getting back to the truth, the gentleman would yield, isn't it true that what you're trying to do in this bill is allow parents to put aside money so that while it may cost the state $1.5 million, it may even cost the state $3 million, but it will put literally 15 times that much money in a savings plan that can pay for college later when those young people get to college age. Isn't that true?
The gentleman knows of what he speaks.
So isn't it true that by doing this, we're putting our future students, our future job seekers in Georgia ahead of the short-term needs of this state and actually putting them in a place where that their parents will prepare them to go and seek higher education, and they will be able to pay for that?
I could not agree more, sir.
I thank the gentleman for bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Do you further yield?
Sure.
Chair recognizes Chairman F. Strachan to your right for a question. To your left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Gentleman yield?
I do.
Isn't it true that 529 accounts have been critically important to students all over the state of Georgia to give them the ability to go to higher education, to get an education, and ultimately be trained for a successful career?
The gentleman knows of what he speaks.
And isn't it true that your legislation, House Bill 266, is going to further the abilities of Georgia students to have bright futures?
the gentleman knows of what he speaks.
Thank you for this bill.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Chair recognizes Representative Wilkerson to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to House Bill 266. I think we just heard a couple of the reasons why. There were a lot of assumptions up here, and dealing with numbers, you don't need to make assumptions. There is no fiscal note for this bill. So whether or not you agree with or disagree with the idea of giving people who make over $150,000 another tax break, that is not what we're discussing here. What we're discussing here is, well, that's a piece of it. But what we're discussing here is the fact that there is no fiscal note. We doubled this fund, the ability to deduct this, I think back in 2015. Representative Teasley at the time passed that bill. I think it flew out of here. There was no opposition. However, that was a different time. Now you can deduct 529 plans. You can use that for private K through 12 education. That was not the case at the time. Now, at the time we were discussing possibly looking at giving needs-based grant through a 529 program. That is no longer the case now. Back in 2015, I received a report from Georgia State that said about 50% of all 529 plans have incomes over $150,000. So yes, it's not that we're helping poor folk here or people that need help. We're helping those in the metro area, and we thank you in Cobb County for helping our folks. But I think we should be working all across this state to help people and not to pass a bill that we don't know if it's 1.5 million, we don't know if it's 3 million, we don't know if it's 10 million or 2 million. We don't know what that number is because we are passing a bill without a fiscal note that impacts state revenue. So I would love to see if, unless there's a fiscal note that I'm missing, I would love to take any questions. Yes. It wasn't in my folder, so I can't, it's hard for me to vote on a bill when a fiscal note's not in my folder, but I will yield for any questions.
You have a couple of questions if you care to yield.
I will, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Morris to your left for a question.
Yes.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do, thank you.
So just for my clarification.
Yes.
Are you acknowledging now that there is a fiscal note and that you just haven't had a chance to look it over?
No, what I'm acknowledging right now is the fact that I have not seen a fiscal note. You can wave any sheet of paper you want in front of my eyes, but when I see it, I will let you know if I do see one. But it wasn't in my folder. But could you tell me what that fiscal note says the cost is?
Well, that wasn't my question, but as long as you yield, I will ask another question. Is it a bad idea for me to contribute money into a 529 plan and save for my child's education?
And that's where I come into, you want me to answer that? Okay, that's where I come into the philosophical differences. And I do believe, yes, 529s are beneficial. At the same time, I also recognize the fact that the majority of the people that put money into a 529 plan are making over $150,000 a year. So what that tells me is this the right time to double that money when we just doubled it to 3 years ago? That's my question, I guess. But yes, if you have the fiscal note, I'd love to see that.
Thank you.
Do you further yield?
I'll take one or two more questions, yes.
Chair recognizes Representative Cannon to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you yield?
Yes, I do.
Is there any further information that you can share with us about the disparities in the contributions to 529 plans between those who are either of middle income or low income and those who are of higher incomes?
The latest information I had, like I said, was received probably about 3 years ago, and it said 30% of the families with a 529 plan make less than $100,000. 82% of those without a plan are less than $100,000. So 82% of families that do not have a 529 plan make under $100,000 a year. Now, like I said, we can argue all day about the philosophical differences on whether or not it should be used for K-12 education, but when we as a chamber are talking about education savings accounts, vouchers, school calendars, just TRS changes. We're making a significant number of changes that our folks at home are starting to scream that we can no longer continue to attack that education pie. And so with that, yes, I am concerned about the impact on low-income families. I'll take one more question, sir. I'll take one more question, Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Wiedauer to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Sir, my understanding is that I provide the fiscal note throughout the subcommittee process and committee process. It is in the system. I cannot speak to what's in your folder. I'd be glad to provide a copy for you now if you'd like.
Yeah, I would, like I said, I would love to, and I'm standing up here, and I kind of pointed at a couple of folks, and maybe it was not in a bipartisan coalition, but I know a couple of Democrats don't have it, so I know I don't. I mean, I see the Democrats raising their hands, so maybe it was not a fiscal note, but typically I try to pay attention to the tax bills as they come through. And I know we didn't get a chance to speak about it. I know I mentioned back there if Representative Teasley had a bill a couple of years ago, but I just ask everybody to, if you have a fiscal note and you feel comfortable with it, vote for it. Otherwise, I ask you to vote in opposition with and join me in opposition to this bill. Any questions? Thank you. I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. There is a minority report. Chair recognizes the minority leader of the House, Leader Trammell, to give the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and members of this House. I'm not going to talk a long time about this bill and about this measure, but I do want to just briefly talk about what we're trying to do when we create tax deductions or incentives for individual taxpayers. When we do that, I think what we're trying to do is accomplish some policy that's good for Georgia. You know, 529s in their original inception were designed so that people could set aside money that would grow tax-free for post-secondary education, to go to college. That's what the 529 money was for. And we have it in the present state of the law where an individual taxpayer can save $2,000, and that's deducted from their aggregate, their taxable income for Georgia tax purposes. So it's roughly about, if you max out as an individual taxpayer, that's about $120, a little less impact in terms of state dollars. And if you max out as joint taxpayers, married, that's about $240. And we're talking about doubling that. But you know, as a result of the tax reform package at the federal level that was passed in 2017, 529s are not just for college anymore. They're also for secondary school, K through 12. So when we talk about a measure like this, 529s at one point in time were set up for college, but we need to be intellectually honest in our conversation about what the impact of doubling the size of the contribution that's eligible to be deducted under Georgia law is, and that is that it allows people to spend that money for private school in Georgia at the expense of dollars that could go toward public school. Under the 2017 tax reform, you can take $10,000 a year from a 529 and pay towards private education. $10,000 a year. And we're talking about doubling for jointly filing taxpayers, doubling the state deduction from $4,000 to $8,000. And to what end? What are we trying to do when we do this bill? I mean, it's great to have a tax deduction. When my kids were born, the first thing I did when I got a Social Security number was I opened a 529. But this bill doesn't do anything to encourage new people to open 529s. It encourages people who are already maxing out to take advantage of that tax deduction. That's it. We're giving people who already get the full extent of the deduction a bigger deduction. That's what this bill does. Short and sweet. And it's not just for college anymore. Mr. Speaker, that's the basic point. I'm happy to yield for questions, but I would urge you to vote against this resolution because when its initial inception a couple of years back, we were talking about something completely different. We were talking about saving for college, but that's not what we're talking about anymore, and we just have to be frank about that. Mr. Speaker, I yield for questions.
Chair recognizes Chairman Hawkins to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
I have 7 children, and I can tell you the cost of college education has gone up in this state quite a bit. So those who are coming after me, all mine are up and gone, but those behind me would appreciate an increase in this manner to help them educate their children.
I appreciate the gentleman's question, but let me just tell you, whether we do this bill or not, a 529 is the best vehicle for college savings going, because all of the accumulation in that 529 until you withdraw occurs tax-free. There's no tax, state or federal, on that money that grows and when you take it out. And not only that, it's the type of vehicle that, let's say I set up the 529 for my son Bob, and hopefully Bob gets a full ride on some type of scholarship, and he doesn't need the money we've done in the 529. Well, what happens to that money? Well, I can just turn around and say, well, we're not going to use it for Bob anymore. We're going to use it for my nephew. That's the type of flexibility a 529 has. But the policy consideration before this body isn't whether or not it's a great investment vehicle for me to send my son to college. It's whether we should be putting state tax dollars towards sending my son not only to college, but opening doors for K through 12 that previously didn't exist. That's the consideration for this body. And we don't need it. It's already a good deal. We don't need to put more state dollars on it. Mr. Speaker, I yield for additional questions if there are any.
Chair recognizes Representative Cannon to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do you yield?
I do.
Is it not true that I just read the fiscal note, and in addition to the $1.9 to $3 million we'll lose out on, there's also an additional $30,000 that the Department of Revenue needs in order to make IT changes and form updates?
If that's what you read from the fiscal note, I certainly have no basis to dispute that.
Thank you. Do you yield again?
I do.
Is it not true that our neighboring states of North Carolina and Tennessee do not have this tax benefit that we're giving further advantage on?
That may be true. I don't have firsthand knowledge of that, but that may indeed be true. Every state has a different incentive program with respect to its 529, and we don't need anything in addition. Georgia's is just fine. Mr. Speaker, if there are any other questions, I would yield.
Chair recognizes Chairman Martin to your right for a question.
Does the leader yield?
I do.
Mr. Leader, if you would, on a personal note, you referred to Bob. I saw your tweet this weekend, the 2 Bobs at Waffle House, and you got a fine-looking young man there. I know you're proud of him. I hope you'll continue to contribute to his 529 so he or his cousin can go to college. Isn't that true?
Well, I thank the gentleman, and I can promise you that we're gonna use that 529 for Bob's cousin and not his college if we can.
I understand. Isn't it true? You mentioned that somebody could take out $10,000 a year and pay for K through 12. I think that, isn't it true? I think that's what's got us a little sideways here. That all of a sudden the federal changes made that you could take it out and what you could use it for is causing the problem. And isn't it true? Even if you do that, if you apply Georgia's 6% tax rate, that if somebody were to take out $10,000 on an annual basis, that after it grew, that really would have only been $600 of state tax money, and that would have been if the $10,000 was the entire new contribution. Isn't that true? What's 6% of $10,000 is $600?
Well, as I understand the legislation, it's not on the $10,000 that goes; it's toward the contribution that goes per year. So the maximum we could be talking about is $8,000 for joint tax filers, so $480 a year.
No, I understand. I was just talking about the when you talk about the money pulled out. If one did not get any growth, that would be. Isn't it further true that if we want to talk about the amounts, the 1.9 million to 3 million, that if in fact it were to quote cost the state $3 million next year because of this increase, that would mean, isn't it true, that $50 million would have been saved by Georgia parents and caregivers for kids to go to college? That's 6% of $50 million is $3 million. So if we, in fact, isn't it true, lost $3 million in revenue, that $50 million would be put aside to educate Georgia's youth. And isn't that a good thing, Mr. Leader?
Well, you're right on the math. The fallacy is they're saving that money anyway. It's not like we move this needle and all of a sudden people start putting in additional money. That may be the case for some, but for the vast majority of people, they're already saving that amount. We're just giving them a larger deduction. So where I would quarrel with your issue is it's not $50 million new dollars. It's a large portion of those $50 million are already being set aside. We're just saying, hey, here's some more state money.
Isn't it true that neither you or I, Mr. Leader, know how many people will do this because of the deduction that aren't doing it today? And this is just giving Georgians an opportunity to save for their children's future, just like you save for Bob's.
So the first part is yes, it is true that we're giving people an opportunity to save. The second part is no, because they already have that opportunity to save. We're not doing anything different. They already have the opportunity to save under a 529. We're just saying that the people who are saving more presently and whether they save more in the future don't need additional state money. Mr. Speaker, I would yield to one more questioner if there is anyone.
Chair recognizes Chairman Knight to your right for a question.
Gentleman yield.
Yes.
To the gentleman, you said that they're not saving any more. They're already saving up under this plan, and that by allowing this bill, they're really not going to save any more than they would have? Could you further explain that?
Sure, absolutely. So presently, when we save for little Bob, we save more than the allowed amount under 529. But we're not going to save more just because this legislation is passed. Now, some people may do that. Some people who are saving just up to the amount that they get the state deduction for, they may see the increase in the state deduction and they may decide that on that basis it's beneficial for them for tax reasons to save more. My premise is that the majority of people who would be impacted by this are already saving $4,000 or $8,000. So they're just getting additional state bang on their state income tax return that they don't need in order to save.
Gentleman, further yield.
I will.
If I'm hearing the gentleman right, I think that's exactly what it is a premise to assume what other people in Georgia are doing. I, as a CPA and many others in the room, have seen this program expand and more dollars come in versus in other areas where they're saving. I do tax returns and I cannot see where they're doing savings otherwise. Isn't that true? Or
I got a little lost in the end of that question.
Sir, I'm not sure your premise is true, because in what I'm seeing, I cannot tell that, and I'm privy to tax returns. I'm privy to personal information. Isn't that not true?
I agree with the gentleman that he's privy to tax returns that I'm not privy to.
Furthermore, just isn't it true that this body has fully funded QBE, and isn't it true that this state leads the nation in lottery?
It's certainly true that we've fully funded QBE and that HOPE was a groundbreaking scholarship program in this country.
Last question, gentlemen, if you'll yield. Isn't it further true that this state believes in making sure that we give every incentive that we can for parents and families to save money to make sure that there is secondary educational opportunities available for Georgia students?
I think that the state makes a lot of efforts in that regard. All I'm saying on this fundamental policy question, and Georgia's not the only one, every state has a 529. What I'm saying on this one is that we don't need additional state dollars to go to incentivize savings. What we've got is working. Let's keep doing what we have. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
The chairman's report will be given by the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Chairman Harrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I want to just make 2 points. First of all, the question was, how is this good for Georgians? Is this good policy? I hope we can all agree that educating our children and assisting in the savings for their education, whether it be K-12 or higher education, is good policy in Georgia. I believe it is, and I believe this bill helps us do that. With regard to the question on the fiscal note, we had 85 tax bills introduced to the Ways and Means Committee this year, 85 different measures. A fiscal note on every measure would be virtually impossible with staff time and effort. We have established that we request fiscal notes on items that rise to a substantial impact on state revenues and have defined that typically as $5 million or higher. The fiscal note issued on January 9th, 2018, that was effective for tax year beginning January 1, 2019, with the exact same amounts, $2,000 to $4,000 and $4,000 to $8,000 on the 529 deductions, resulted in the exact numbers the author presented to you: $1.9 million on the low end, $3 million on the high end for fiscal year 2020. The same for fiscal year 2021, the same for fiscal year 2022, the same for fiscal year 2023. I cannot answer the question why it was not in your folder to the representative that asked that question, but had you asked the author, had you asked me, you would know that we do have a current fiscal note projected beyond the term of when this bill would become effective for the exact same terms contained in the measure. So I don't want you to think for a moment that there was not fiscal analysis done and that we weren't making a decision based on solid ground on what that impact would be. The other question with regard to the cost to the Department of Revenue, I would encourage all of you to go online and read all the fiscal notes that we prepare and read the Department of Revenue's response to every fiscal note we prepare. I think you would be surprised to read the range of costs and expenses suggested to implement every policy we pass with a fiscal impact on this state. Those costs are covered in the annual appropriation process for the money that we appropriate to the Department of Revenue, just as the funds we appropriate to all departments of the state to handle their administration, to handle staffing requirements, to handle IT upgrades. But they are attached to each and every fiscal note. So I appreciate the question there, but I want you to have confidence that the bills coming out of the Ways and Means Committee will be vetted. There will be a sound basis on the cost, and it is my promise to you that we will not have bills emerging from that committee without knowing a reasonable range of what that measure might cost. Thank you for your time on this measure, and I'll yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. Previous question has been ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of House Bill 266 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Wilkerson rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that I appreciate the author of the bill giving me the fiscal note, which says that this bill does not include the impact of the recently passed federal tax legislation? When I say recently, I mean a year and almost a year and a half ago.
If the gentleman so states. What purpose does Chairman Martin rise?
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true, Mr. Speaker, we were all wrong when we were talking about this bill because we kept talking about 6% and the maximum tax rate in Georgia based on the action of this body signed into law by governor, it's only 5.75. Isn't that true, Mr. Speaker?
I believe that to be true.
Isn't it further true? Parliamentary inquiry, Mr.
State
Speaker.
your inquiry.
Isn't it further true that earlier the gentleman was questioning about why Tennessee doesn't do this? Isn't it true that Tennessee doesn't need a deduction because Tennessee, sir, doesn't charge any income tax? Isn't that true?
Well, the chair has a pretty good view of Tennessee from where I live. Doesn't qualify me as an expert in foreign policy, though. And I know that to be true. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the passage of House Bill 266, the ayes are 95, the nays are 64. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. What purpose does Representative Wilkerson rise?
I would like to ask for reconsideration.
If I understand the gentleman's intent is to serve notice of your intent to ask for reconsideration on tomorrow's calendar. Would that be accurate?
That would be accurate. I just
And
cut it short. Thank you.
We will note that. Gentleman has served notice of reconsideration. It will be taken up prior to morning orders on the next legislative day. What purpose does Representative Gravely rise?
Make a motion.
State your motion.
I move to recommit House Bill 324 back to Rules Committee.
Gentleman has moved to recommit House Bill 324 back to the Committee on Rules. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 324 by Representative Gravely, the 67th, Newton of the 123rd, file of the 32nd, Smiley of the 135th, Clark of the 98th, be entitled an act to amend Chapter 12 of Title 16 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated, relating to offenses against public health and morals, so as to provide for the production, manufacturing, and dispensing of low THC oil.
On the gentleman's motion that House Bill 324 be recommitted to the Rules Committee, is there objection? Is there objection? Chair hears none, and it is so ordered. The chair announces that House Bill 426 will be postponed to the next legislative day. If you have signed up for an announcement, make your way to the front of the chamber. And while House will be in order while we go through the announcements. Chair recognizes Chairman Barr for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to inform the Code Revision Committee that we will not have a meeting today. The Code Revision Committee has been rescheduled for tomorrow. Thank you, sir.
Chair recognizes Chairman Corbett for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Motor Vehicles Full Committee will meet in the morning, room 515 at 8 o'clock. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Beverly for an announcement.
Thank you, Speaker. The Georgia House Democratic Caucus will meet tomorrow 8 a.m. in room 216. House Democratic Caucus tomorrow 8 a.m. in room 216. Thanks, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Meeks for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Consumer Affairs Subcommittee of the Agriculture and Consumer Affairs Full Committee will meet in 403 in the Capitol immediately upon adjournment. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Alan Powell for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the members of the House Regulated Industry Committee, we'll have a meeting at 3:30 in LOB 506, and please make every attempt to be there.
Chair recognizes Chairman Lynn Smith for an announcement.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a reminder tomorrow morning the House Natural Resource and Environment Committee is meeting at 8 o'clock in room 606 CLOB, and we will have, we think, a couple of bills to consider at that point. We'll announce them as soon as we know. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Parsons for an announcement.
Thank you, Speaker. Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications meeting at 3 o'clock here in the Capitol at room 403 upstairs here in the Capitol, 3 o'clock, EUT. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Reinders for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will be a full Committee of Governmental Affairs in the morning at 8 a.m. Room 406 of the LOB, 8 a.m. Governmental Affairs 406. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Chairman Hitchens for an announcement.
Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee will meet at 3 o'clock in room 606 CLOB. Immediately after we adjourn.
Chair recognizes Chairman Petrie for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the members of the Human Relations and Aging Committee, we will meet upon adjournment in 506 CLOB. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman McCall for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At 7:30 in the morning, there'll be an Ag Committee meeting in 415 LOB. I hope at least 8 people can get there, and it'll be short.
Chair recognizes Chairman Cooper for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Health and Human Services Committee, we are not going to meet this afternoon. Health and Human Services, we will not meet because there is a committee before us that needs 2 hours, and that would put us starting after 5. So we will meet tomorrow at our usual time. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, 606 LOB. No Health and Human Services Committee today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Chairman Ron Stevens for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members of the Economic Development and Tourism Committee will meet tomorrow morning at 8:30, 415 CLOB.
That completes our announcements. I'm sorry. Chair recognizes Chairman Dickey for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the morning at 8 o'clock, there will be an Education Appropriations Committee meeting. Thank you.
I do not see Representative Debbie Buckner. I know she's had very important things to take care of today, but in her absence, we're going to wish her a happy birthday. Representative Buckner. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader of the House for a motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that this House stand in recess until 5 p.m. today and then be adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, March the 5th, 2019.
The Majority Leader has moved that this House be in recess until 5 o'clock p.m. today, whereupon we would stand adjourned until Tuesday, March 5th at 10 a.m. All those in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it. This House will be in recess until 5 p.m. and then we will be adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, March 5th.